Welcome back to The Decision 2024, brought to you by Valuetainment and VT Analytics. There is a bunch of big stories this week. We have them for you. The top headlines for the week, showing you where the Kamala Harris campaign thinks their path to victory is. We don't believe it. Also, the national polls, a dive into North Carolina, and our call. All of that and more this week. Bringing it to you, I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc.
I'm Amy Dangerfield. Let's go ahead and dive into this week's headlines. Trump and Harris are apparently virtually deadlocked in a surprise battleground state.
Blue Virginia.
Now, we covered Virginia a couple of weeks ago, and you will remember that they were holding out on releasing some of those polls, and most of the ones that were available showed Harris up by a very impressive margin. Now, what's interesting about the current poll that was released by the University of Mary Washington is it shows only a 1-point difference, 46 to 47, with Trump at 46.
Well, the polls and the aggregators, they wouldn't lie, spin, or shade the truth, would they?
That would be odd, wouldn't it? Moving on, now we're talking about Nebraska. Apparently, they're looking to transition to a winner-take-all system. We have Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, out there lobbying for it as we speak. And if it does go through, that means that that one extra congressional district that is currently blue would go to Trump, which makes a very big difference. It's only 1 point, but in a race with razor-thin margins, it can make a very big difference. And of course, they only divide by congressional districts in Nebraska and Maine. And then finally, the Teamsters Union skips out on giving a presidential endorsement. Now, this was shocking news for a lot of people.
Big surprise.
But what we have to say is no endorsement is kind of an endorsement in a way. We know where their head is at if they are unwilling to go ahead and endorse the Harris campaign.
Why don't you share why that is? The Teamsters polled their own membership, didn't they? What was that?
They did. Mid-30s to mid-50s were in favor of Trump.
Wow. So if that's what your members are thinking, you can't very much go out and support one or the other. You're traditionally a blue union. You just come out and say, yeah, we're not going to endorse anyone. We'll let our members vote for themselves. What's also interesting is this week's national poll. We've been following Rasmussen reports. We feel that they have got high veracity with this, and they're not aggregating and making selective decisions, if you will, or shades with what they want. And in here you can see Trump is holding now at 5. If you take a look at the trend line for Trump, it tends to be going up about a point and a half over the last 6 weeks, whereas Kamala Harris is either flat to a half a point up. So you can see this 4 to 5 point national spread is what is happening. There was no debate bounce, really. There was debate enthusiasm, but there wasn't a bounce in the polls. As a matter of fact, as we reported, the independents and the undecideds went toward Trump. And now, Amy, why don't you take us to Emerson College that put out multiple battleground states? We don't think this poll is perfect, but it's less imperfect than others. Let's walk through some highlights.
Yes, so Emerson, they came in about midway through the accurate pollsters, the graph that we showed you all last week. And we can see that Trump is now widening his lead in many of the battleground states. The two that we have circled here are Georgia. He is leading 50% to Harris's 47%. And then when it comes to Michigan, there's a 2-point difference. Harris is up ahead by 49 compared to Trump's 47. So we flick over to the next slide and we can see that Emerson has Nevada in a virtual deadlock, both at 48%. They say that Harris has a slight lead at 49 compared to Trump's 48 when it comes to North Carolina. Just wait a little bit because we're going to take you through a deep dive that may actually paint an entirely different picture. And then finally, we see Trump ahead in 2 of the 3 blue wall states. We have Pennsylvania and Wisconsin with Trump in the lead.
Now, why is that important? Let's explain this. We just showed you the Emerson polling and the internals. When we say internals, that's what the campaigns believe is what they're up against and what the truth of it. Even the campaigns don't take any of these polls at their face value and do a lot of work on the road, on the ground by themselves. Over the weekend, the Harris campaign was leaked and multiple credible sources showed that what they were seeing as the path to victory is, look at this, Trump winning Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they take Michigan. That's what the Emerson polls are showing. But the internals, we have Pennsylvania, as we've shared, 3 points heading to 4 unless Trump's momentum wanes. But look here, North Carolina and Georgia are the path to victory at 273. There's the strategy. They believe Nevada and Arizona, because of the incredible response to the immigration crisis, are going further and further red. And Trump has gotten tremendous traction, as we covered, on no tax on tips and more recently, no tax on overtime. So it appears that the Harris campaign believes those polls because of the amount of money they're spending in media markets and the amount of visits they're making. However, they're hitting hard in Georgia and North Carolina. Georgia does show tight. They believe they can win North Carolina, but they are actually softening their media spend in Pennsylvania, where we see tremendous momentum forming for Trump, as well as a widening, as we've just shared in our own numbers. If it happens this way, Harris is elected. If Georgia goes, Trump is way over the top, even without North Carolina here. But we believe that North Carolina and Georgia are both going to go red.
Absolutely. And so now, speaking of North Carolina, let's go ahead and take a look back to how things unfolded during the 2020 elections. Now, we can see that Trump won most of the counties in 2020. Biden was strong in the urban areas, so that is, Charlotte, Greensboro, Raleigh. However, Trump dominated in all of the rural areas. When we take a look at the relative size of victory, we can see that with the large blue dots, this is where Biden's success was mostly concentrated. However, we can see that Trump was still very victorious, just slightly smaller dots and a little bit more widespread than Biden. And this is what made up the battleground in 2020.
Amy, so we can see how this is a true battleground forming right now. But what does the history look like?
Yeah, so North Carolina is a state that is historically red. Since 2000, there has been a Republican winner in every single presidential election, aside from Obama in the year 2008. And we can see that when he won, it was by razor-thin margins. What is that, 0.3%? Going into the 2008 election. Since then, it has been a Republican stronghold. And when we flick over to the next polls, we will see that we have a strong feeling that it will continue to be so going into the 2024 election. But first, let's dive into the voters and issues when it comes to North Carolina.
Well, I think it's very interesting that Democrats and Republicans are registered within 150,000 voters apart, but there are 2.7 million that identify as independents. Libertarian is here. So these are independents, Greens, and others that outnumber either of the major parties. There's a tremendous feeling of independence that is in North Carolina, and it shows up in the key issues. The inflation and economy is number one for them. Healthcare is number two. There's a lot of retirement in North Carolina. North Carolina is not quite all the way in the south, not quite all the way in the north, and there's a great balanced population that's there among racial mix as well as among the elderly, the middle-aged, and the young. And tremendous colleges, University of North Carolina, Duke, Wake Forest, NC State, tremendous Tier 1 schools in America with a lot of young people and students. And so healthcare being a concern, and then immigration. Believe it or not, immigration shows up number 3 in North Carolina. But it shows you that a good job, living well with good cost of living, with health care for the older people, and immigration not impacting the major cities, that is the way the increasingly independents in North Carolina are thinking. So Amy, that's what they're thinking. How are they polling?
It's been very interesting. We have heard this narrative that Harris is now starting to take a lead. And as we can see, the Democratic Party are painting it as one of her paths to victory. However, when we look at the polls, we can see that they're telling a very different story. And it just makes you wonder, if these polls have been released, what are the ones that they are withholding, Tom? I wonder what margins those ones are showing.
There are major polls that are being withheld, and there has not been a great number of major polls with the North Carolina summary with crosstabs that we can inspect coming out. But take us through Victory Insights.
Yeah, so we can see that Victory Insights has Trump up by +4 currently. This is a poll that was taken with 600 likely voters. That's the voter group that we always recommend when analyzing these polls. And next we drop down to Trafalgar. Now this poll was from a couple of weeks ago. However, it is made up of 1,094 likely voters. And Trafalgar was in the top 5 most accurate pollsters for the 2020 elections. And they have Trump up by 2 full points, which makes sense because as we can see, the most recent poll by Victory Insights is now up by +4.
Very interesting stuff. Shows that North Carolina, we think it's more than a lean to Trump. We think it's leaning with momentum. So now, last time that we talked about this, I misspoke. I said 2028. I meant to say 2032. Let's take a look at where the electoral votes are going and how the path to the White House is going to be so much different. There is a belief that there could be definitely 3, but up to 4 electoral votes lost by New York that will head to places like Texas and Florida. So let's take a look at it. We talk about the Sunbelt migration, and there's really, so if it's blue, you're getting votes. If it's yellow, orange, or red, you're losing votes. Take a look. There is a prediction that California will lose 4 electoral votes, New York will lose 3 electoral votes, and you see each of the yellows up here, Minnesota, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the so-called blue wall, will each lose 1 or 2. Well, where are they moving? We know where they're moving. To the South, Sunbelt, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and then to the deep red, Texas and Florida. So when you see this, you can see the battleground forming. If this was the map this year, right now the path to victory for Kamala Harris would be incredibly tight, because with this addition of electoral votes here, Trump would be, by our estimations, up above 90% prediction to win based on the simple math and the polling. This is what's interesting coming in 2032. So as they say, if you're going to get it right, you got to get it right this year, because over the next 2 elections, there's going to be a dramatic change as the census is taken in 2030 and then impacts the Electoral College and the House of Representatives in 2032. So you can see where this is going, that if the conservative hold happens on the Sunbelt, it becomes more and more difficult as the blue wall becomes a much shorter, less important blue wall, and New York and California, historically dark blue guarantees, give up some of their advantage.
And so now it's time for our Valuetainment Call. This is the culmination of all of the data that you just saw previously, plus our own aggregate to give you our call 6 weeks from the election. Tom, can you believe there's only 6 weeks to go? Let's go ahead and take a look at Valuetainment's call. What are we seeing?
Well, it is unchanged from last week that we see New Hampshire probably going to be blue, but very, very tight, and a 77% chance for Donald Trump. We see Michigan on the verge of being lean blue. However, this is already 287 right here, with Wisconsin 297. And so with only a few weeks left, a lot of things can happen. Everything from dirty tricks to things coming up to scandals to gaffes that are committed. But we think that we are at 287 to 297 for Donald Trump, and that New Hampshire and Michigan will likely be blue and Wisconsin will likely be red, and that becomes the map. However, it's very tight down here. As you see, we still have Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona in light red. So there's work to be done, but we see a 77% probability for Donald Trump at this hour.
So next week, we're going to be touching on the national polls as usual, but then after that, we're going to be quickly diving into the battlegrounds where the most competitive race is currently being held. We're talking Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. And we'll see you next week with new data and new polls to dive into. Until next time, my name is Amy Dangerfield.
And I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc, and we're going to let the candidates talk, the media spin, but we're going to bring you the numbers, because words talk and numbers scream.